Great. Thank you, Suri, for that introduction and for giving the energy of this little conference today for a few hours at least. And I think it's a welcoming sight to see the rain coming down here when we're talking about Mini Wichoni or Mini or water in English. But I think that the context that we need to set here is one of a conversation, your energy and our energy and how things are done, but not so much as it's an instant manual to know how to do things, right? How to do things, like there is a drive-up mentality here in America that you can get it by just paying for it, but you have to experience it, like as we have as indigenous folks here, and knowing it differently with the ceremonies within the context of where we come from, because water, as you'll hear from the native people, is that it's within all of our ceremonies, no matter what. And so we begin that consciousness with it every day, even though you may not think of it consciously, is that you also are participating in that ceremony the minute you drink water from the very get-go, when you bathe, when you shower, when you cook with it. So it's in that context that we would want this conversation to be said here, as we come from Arizona, New York, Oregon, and Washington area here, from South Dakota. And so we want that to happen to you as we feel this conversation out of dialogue, not so much speech making, but we want to end it the last half hour or so to have a conversation with you, a Q&A, if you will, if that's the word or correct term for it. But I find that, traveling around the world, there's a lot of young people feeling something's terribly wrong, but they don't have the language to speak it, to express it. And I find also of the 7,000 languages in the world spoken entirely by all peoples, the majority of these languages are indigenous languages. About 72% of them are indigenous languages, which, by the way, by the count that we did at the United Nations a few years ago, there may be a possibility that all but 2 or 3 of these indigenous languages with all over the world may be extinct by the time your children are in college or so. By the end of the century, these indigenous languages may be extinct. And in my studies at Yale University, we have what we call a quantum physics sector, and what we're doing is understanding that these indigenous languages are very quantum physics, that they're outside of the capacity of the Western alphabet A to Z, that their concepts are non-concepts, that everything is in verbs, mostly in verbs. It's not a noun-laden language where you can subjectify or objectify everything. And so with that, you think about the languages that we have are in motion, just describing, not just naming what water is, but various aspects of what that means to our local indigenous peoples. I will refuse to say tribes here, because that was what was said to the 3 indigenous peoples groups, because they could not be civilized by the Roman back in the day. So we as native peoples would be referred to as nations here. Even so, that's who we are or aren't. We are who we are as native people. And so with that, the context that I'd like to set was more or less that we are having a conversation with water already. As older people here, we are working with water. We are in the thought of water and prayer and memory and all those things that science now is coming to find out that what the native peoples are saying is really true. And so this is the way we're going to do these things. And today, I hope this opens up a little bit, and not so much the mental, but the energy exchange that we want to express in that consciousness of who we are as indigenous folks here. So with that, I'd like to ask an elder here, Ed Johnstone, to begin with giving us a little prayer. And for those of you who are streaming this, would you not record this part? And if Ed Johnstone would lead us in a little prayer. And then I'd ask Willie Frank to welcome us here, because this is near the Nisqually area lands, and we'll begin after this.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Willie Frank III. My Indian name is Klairice. That was given to me by my grandfather. And I want to welcome you guys all to this event today. It's truly an honor for me to be up here. And we're on the homelands of the Medicine Creek Territory, Squaxin, Nisqually, and Puyallup. So I want to welcome you guys, and I hope we can get some good communication out of this and move forward all together. Thank you.
All right. So Suri and I were talking yesterday, met with Holland and Anthony, and we wondered what could we start with here. In our experiencing life as young people, as older people here now, is there was some moment, a seminal moment in our lives that switched our hearts to switch our brains, which was already in our hearts, that here's the work we must do, because I hear a lot of prophecies about Native people talking about this time, these times. And so these are just not recent prophecies, and the prophecy that's held is not so much a punitive, like the Western thought is that prophecy is punitive, that something really bad is going to happen to you, and there's no getting away from it. But I think that the prophecies of the Western, of the Native people, are more or less non-punitive, where you still have a choice, not to instill hope in it, but to understand the practical means of choice is that if you do one thing, it'll work. But if you continue to make the wrong choices, it won't work. That's simple prophecy. And I think that's where we're going to begin, is that this conversation will begin with our experience. And as you can relate to your own, and maybe it's the reason why you're here, is to understand that experience with water, what it means to you. And I would like that to begin with whoever, we're going to kind of go like they call it popcorn here. What we feel out of our experience is what will compel us to speak to you. So each one of our panelists here, if you would volunteer yourself to give a little story about, or just to even hold a conversation about what it meant, water meant to you at that time in your young life that changed your mind to even be here today.
Maybe I can start. You know, this subject is I don't know, using words like huge. When I was asked to be on this panel, I had to kind of tease out where, you know, what do I have to contribute, and get a kind of a sense of, you know, the participation in water is exactly in its simplest form is life. And in my lifetime, the importance of water has escalated so greatly that growing up in a rainforest off of the Olympic Mountains into the Quinault Valley, into the Quinault River, down to my village at Tohola on the Quinault Reservation, you wouldn't think a village would have to look for water, but we did. When our wells went dry and we had to go several miles up the Quinault River to find water. We had to use technology use pumps, lift pumps, and pipelines to bring it downriver and under the river to our village because there was no more water in our wells. That's something we face throughout our lands. Many areas that you may or may not be aware of don't have running water, and they have to truck it in and so forth. When I was a kid, in the village of Whole River, we didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. not that long ago, in the 50s into the 60s. In Tahola, yes, we did, but not in Hoh River. So maybe a lot of you haven't even experienced that. So water has been ever encompassing around us. And about 20 years ago or so, we had a planning meeting at the Northwest Indian Fish Commission. And my oldest brother, Guy McMines, basically, through his discussions with us as we put the whiteboard, we put the easel up there, and we identified the importance of the work that we're doing. And the number one thing that he put up there was water. More valuable than gold. And he told my tribal council, I'm afraid that they're going to come for our water. They'll build a pipeline over the Olympic Mountains and they'll come and take our water, is what he told my council. And I think he is spot on. The massive population growth, in particular in Puget Sound, in the Evergreen state, is hungry for water. The government adopting water laws that are not good for anybody, giving away the habitat in the name of growth and development. The water that is needed to cool those rivers for our salmon and salmon recovery is not there. The water quality is not there. And we fight every day. We're in the trenches. Willie Frank, myself, our colleagues, the people around this table, the people that care about life, not only our life, but our children's life and our grandchildren's lives. And we say the 7 generations. So this is a big, big, all-encompassing issue. We're involved in salmon recovery. We're involved in moving our communities because of the change that we see in this earth. And the relevancy there is the water. The water that's no longer in the mountains, the glaciers that cool our rivers and bring our salmon home. But on the other side of that is the ocean that is rising, and the storm surges are greater and imperil our villages on these, now they're calling them king tides. That the water comes over, breaches a seawall, and comes into our village. The village of Tahola, the village of Hoh River, the village of La Push, the village of Macaw, and up north our brothers and sisters in Shishmaref, Alaska, and other places. All around the subject of water. So this is a, big area that we can cover. We are in almost all of it, every one of us. And voices are needed in the dialogue about water. So I just would open with that, and appreciate the opportunity to be here.
I'll go next. I'm Louise Benally. I'm from the Southwest, and their water is very scarce. So in my sense, of realizing things. You know, my grandfathers, my mothers, my father, they all were ceremonial people that did many kinds of healing practices, and every one of it involved water. And so I was taught at a young age that water is life, that it hears, that it sees, that it knows, and that it is the key element for survival. So I brought the crystal. This is water. So we see things through this. If we're not able to find answers at the human level, then we go to this. And this goes to the stars, to the, planets in the universe. So we bring messages through it, and it is from water. And this is the first life, as I was taught, these were the living beings before what you see as living things now. So now they live under the surface and some on surface. And they communicate with light, and that's what I was taught. And also that, the abalone, I was told, is fire and water, and that is an element of the earth that is mixed of two different things, and that's what it represents. And then in my way, my people's way, the corn pollen is our key offering element for life, because without pollen, there is no life, there is no food. And all that is impacted now because of greed. And in the country where I come from, we're in a high desert terrain, and there's not much surface water. We don't have rivers. We don't have abundance of water, lakes, like you have here in the Northwest. And so there, all that is drying out and everything is changing. And the rain now is monitored and manipulated by, human beings. They spray, they make clouds, and it rains or it snows, and it's the so-called U.S. military, the U.S. NASA, the space people. They mess with everything, and they are messing with things that shouldn't be messed with. So now you see the consequences of that, of it returning nature, lifting its hands, and you got the forest fires, you got the drying out of waters, the diminishing of the natural resources such as fishes, different lives in the ocean, different lives on the surface. The elements of the earth is changing, as in food, from the changes in the atmosphere. So it all regulates one another, and the moon is the regulator of the water. And even that they messed with by trying to set off a bomb up there a few years back. And so, we're creating this mess in the name of greed first, secondly, in the name of education. What more do you need to know? Isn't just your life enough? That's my question. And so we are impacted, we are feeling it, and we are disturbed by it. So there's so much hostility in the outer world out there. People are turning to the pharmaceutical world to hopefully address some of these things, but then it has a lot of side effects. So the same thing with the experiments that are going on with the atmosphere, with the earth itself, and with the sounds in the ocean, it's disrupting the lives in the ocean. So water should not be disturbed. Water should be respected. But yet, we have people that walk this earth that don't have any conscience, and they want to mess with everything. And there are some things that we're not supposed to mess with. We're messing with those things. So we're bringing it on ourselves that way as human species. And so for myself, I don't have a formal education. I come from where there is no water. I still live in a home with dirt floor. I still have to go out and pick wood to make warmth to cook with. I still have to haul water. But the water in my region are all contaminated by uranium mining, by coal mining, by oil and gas development, and it's impacting my nation and all the living things, including the air, the water itself. And so, that's where I come from, and I have to find ways to continue to spread the message, share the message, and hopefully looking for, remedies that might help change the contaminants in the soil and the water that will also impact the air. So that's my journey in this life, and it's always been, and because of greed, my community has been disturbed for so long because our so-called tribal government sign off lands to outside companies that want to develop. And then they come in and desecrate the land, toxify it, and then move on to the next space. So this is a pattern that needs to change also, and that's in your hands as young people. If you can find ways to educate the people, to help them wean off this need to have mineral extraction to make energy. There's other ways to make energy, but they don't want to see that because it doesn't fill up their pockets. And so it's in your hands as young people to help find that way so that we can have a future. Thank you.
Good morning, my dear people. My name is Clairice Westley. I'm from the Columbia River. I live in Cascade Locks. I co-founded the Wanapum fishing people against Nestle when they came into our town in 2008 to take Oxbow Springs. In our language, that's Ko'opuanaish is the name of that spring. It's really pretty. It's not a pipe coming out of a rock. It's the spring, the pool. The city wanted to sell this water to Nestle. They would extract 230 million gallons a year from our sacred spring there. That area is on Warm Spring ceded land. But the tribes didn't even find out about this till 2015 and wrote letters. I had a display, but I apologize, didn't bring it. I had it last night at the dinner. The groups Food and Water Watch and Local Water Alliance and BARC, they had been fighting this, since 2008. We didn't find out. None of the fishermen knew on the river on their loose sites, what's called fishing loose sites. My son had to go all up and down along Washington, along the Columbia River, and Oregon sited all the loose sites asking the fishermen, have you heard of this? Have you heard of this? He was after me for like 2 years because he found out about this, what they were trying to do to our spring. And like when brother down here talked about, the springs that regulates the water temperature and the water level so that it's just right for the fish. And those things are covered in our treaty, the Treaty of 1855 with the Columbia River tribes. And it even says in there, it necessitates, water to be there in order for us to practice our fishing rights, our livelihood. From our beginning of time, we would harvest the fish. And it's a part of our spiritual practice. We drink the chush, the water, before we eat. There's a song for that. And then when we're done, we drink the water, because I'm not telling you anything you don't know here. Nothing can survive without water. When I was young, I've never told this story. I think maybe I was ashamed. I remember as a little girl, they said, there's going to come a time when they'll be able to control the weather. This industrial world. Gee, I remember thinking to myself as a little girl, if that happens, I'm going to kill myself, I said to myself. And that's the first time I've shared this. But as Native people, this is our land. Our ancestors are from here. That's how we're connected to our land. And so we feel when our earth is suffering. We might not have the big scientific fancy words until we get educated or meet other people that know these words to explain it, but we feel it, the suffering of our earth. Because when all the animals suffer, then we suffer when the land suffers. Because what we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. When I was young, young woman, teenager, and I really feel for you young people, and ashamed of my generation, even all of us, what have we left you? What have we done? What have we not done? So that you're going to have an earth that's livable. You're going to have air you can breathe, clean water somewhere. Now, Nestle wants to own our water rights. So we kicked them out of Oregon. We won that battle. Yeah, right. So you can win. You can win. It took about 10 years, but here's the thing. You have to get it before the papers are signed and sealed and delivered. You have to start fighting it before that, because once they have the permits through the Water Resource Department and the Fish and Wildlife and all that, once that goes through, it's done. So I know a lot of you young people are no different than us, maybe, when we was all young, those of us that are activists. It's confusing. What issue do I pick? Do I save the whales, the salmon, the trees, the spotted owl, the water, the little children that are suffering, special needs? And me, I'm an educator. I worked with Native education, most of my life. It's my life's work. I love children. And I would think to myself, what's the best thing now? Do we work with our children so we can shape their minds, so they can love the earth and be responsible in their everyday actions? Or do we go over here and get in the front lines and chain ourselves up, to the trees or whatever, the trains that bring the oil and coal, all of that? Sometimes I know it's confusing. We get overwhelmed and we want to do it all. So I could just advise to, try to pick one thing, because it's, it is all connected. Try to pick one thing. You try to do too much, you'll get overwhelmed and depressed maybe and just fall down somewhere. So try to find that one thing. And then, for me, as I got to be an adult like that, and I was thinking that, well, I remember when I first moved to Portland from the reservation from Warm Springs, and I heard that in the news. They said, there's been a drought here for 50 years. And I thought, gee, every time I come to Portland, it's raining, it's always raining. How can there be a drought? But there is, and it's absurd, for the city of Cascade Locks to decide that we're going to just give Nestle our water rights. They are after our water rights. They started with what was called a water exchange application, and then they went to water rights to take our water rights away. And because of our tribes that got involved, the 4 tribes, Warm Springs, Yakima, Umatilla, and Nez Perce, we were able to stop that. They will no longer be able to use that, not even in the future. They can't use the transfer of water rights application anymore. So that was a huge success. But I was thinking about, what's the more important issue, and with in the politics, all the issues out there with immigration and women's rights to choose and all of these things, so many issues. None of those are going to mean anything without water. None of those are going to mean anything without our earth. If it's not livable, none of those will mean anything. So maybe sometimes I think we should just all be trying to work on the water issues. But when we first found out about Nestle in 2015, I was thinking, we got our 4 tribes, They're far away. How can we get this information to everybody right now? We had to do it now. Time was getting short. And so I decided to do a fast with no food and water for 5 days, and I sat in front of the City Hall in Cascade Locks. We called it the Anna Mae Leonard Fast in honor of Anna Mae Aquash and Leonard Peltier with the American Indian Movement. Anna Mae Leonard represented all 4 tribes during that fast. And when the people of Hood River County in 2016, brought forth a ballot measure to protect the water in Hood River County, and we're successful. We won that too. But the governor of Oregon, Kate Brown, and all the agencies, Fish and Wildlife, Water Resource Department, decided, no, we're going to go ahead with this anyway. And this is supposed to be the green state, Oregon, Washington, but no, we're going to go ahead with this. And so, but they didn't. So, you can win. You can win. It takes a lot. You have to organize. And when I did that first fast, by the end of the day, it was on the Facebook all over, and all kinds of tribal members showed up from the reservation. I was surprised, that fast. Everybody showed up. And one of the things that was really unique about this, back in the day in the 80s during the fish wars and all of the other, wars we have with the powers that be. Normally, as Native activists, we're up against the city, the townspeople, the county, the state, all of the agencies, the state agencies, and our own tribes. At this time, we were all together in it, except for the state and the agencies, but, and the city council, but otherwise the people, all our councils were against Nestle, and they came to the rallies and spoke, represented. So things are getting better. So don't give up. That's like a message I want to give to you today, to know that you can do this, and that you can win, and that we have to, because we don't really have a choice. Klawi Kush, that's all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Well, greetings, and it's a tremendous honor to be among this group of people on this panel, and I really want to thank you specifically for giving voice to the suffering of the earth, and also to the confusion that many of us feel when we are younger about where to take our energy, our activism, sometimes our anger, sometimes our love, on all of these issues. And I am also here to share the message that you can win. As a filmmaker, here on the Olympic Peninsula where I live, I've had the real pleasure over 8 years now of bearing witness to an extraordinary success story. And I imagine that many of you are familiar with it. How many of you are familiar with the story of the Elwha River on the Olympic Peninsula? It's for some of our visitors from afar. It is still the site of the largest dam removal on the planet, although I think will be overtaken by others, hopefully soon. 2 major dams were removed between 2011 and 2014. And I had the honor, I felt, as a media maker, as a filmmaker, to bear witness to that journey and also to act as a voice and an advocate for the river. However, as long and as challenging as it is to make a feature film, and all of you who are here in media studies, I'm sure you're well aware of that, it pales in comparison to the effort and energy it takes to restore and advocate for a river. And for that, I want to say my most heartfelt thank you to the many Indigenous communities who were involved, but most particularly the community on the Lower Elwha, who are among the Salish Coast nations here around the Salish Sea, who took an unwavering stand for the Elwha River for a century. Those dams went up. The first dam went up exactly 100 years before it came down, and they were illegal the whole time. They were both built without fish passage, and a law did exist on the books here in Washington State that required that fish passage be built anywhere where salmon were, in the language of the time, wont to ascend. And those dams made it for 100 years until they finally came down, thanks to the many voices that spoke out for them. But I heard the opening of a question of how do each one of us come to the advocacy, to the care, to the love of water, and how did I, as a filmmaker, come to this moment of truly committing myself to a labor of love, which was to work on a feature film for years and years and years, initially with no funding, eventually with, to tell this story. And the truth is, that seed got planted much earlier than even my move to the Olympic Peninsula, which is now close to 2 decades ago. I grew up on the waters on the coast of Maine, and I mean that literally, largely on a boat. And I, however, had the experience as a young adult to go far away, halfway around the world, and I found myself working in China. And I was on the Yangtze River during the time that the largest dam ever built on planet Earth was under construction. It hadn't been completed yet. At the time, I wasn't filmmaking. I was largely a teacher and a writer, and I had the opportunity in those capacities to take one of the last ferries down the Yangtze River before the dam was complete. And this ferry stopped at one little community after another that were all slated to be inundated literally within a matter of months. It's a journey I will never forget as long as I live. And at each one of those stops, what struck me initially is that there were big red lines painted in red paint. Some of those lines were on temples, places of worship. Some of them were on schools or homes or just on the rocks on the hillside. And you can guess what those red lines meant. They were the line of the future inundation level that was going to occur with the completion of the Yangtze River Dam. So each one of those villages that I saw on that trip no longer exists. They're all gone. And I haven't been back specifically to the Yangtze since the dam was completed and each one of those villages went underwater. But what struck me at that moment is that even with just months or maybe weeks for some of them to go, there was all this life going on close to the water, where life always happens, close to a river, right? Every river has its people, as we all know. And markets were open and the streets were bustling as if the water was never going to rise. And it did. And now when I look around as a coastal resident, I see in my own mind those red lines everywhere and life bustling away on all of our coastal waterfronts as if the water is never going to rise, some 20 years later here. And so that journey on the Yangtze has haunted me both from the perspective of all of us who will inevitably contend with sea level rise, but also more specifically around the impact that a dam has on a river. So fast forward to 2011 on the Olympic Peninsula, where I'm raising my daughter and making a life with gratitude for the abundance of this land that we share and have the opportunity to live on as well. And the deconstruction of the Lower Elwha Dam began. I went there first not to start a film, but with my daughter, who was then in kindergarten. And I found myself on an overlook very similar in a way to the overlook I'd stood on many years ago watching a dam being built. And at that overlook long ago in the Yangtze, because of the nature of the government at the time, people didn't speak about what they saw happening, but I was reading a story in the faces and a story of worry and loss. Standing at this overlook on the Elwha River, I was seeing a story of absolute giddy anticipation as bulldozers were lining up about to take down a dam after the many hard years of advocacy had won a success on paper. And so I returned with a camera and others, and also began to have a collaboration for which I am very grateful with Frances Charles, the chairwoman of the Lower Elwha Column tribe, and began to document the process of the removal of those dams. And as a storyteller and a filmmaker, every now and then, maybe even once in a lifetime, a story grabs you by the scruff of the neck like a little kitten, and it just won't let you go. And watching the dust rise from the jackhammers on that dam, I knew that I was going to complete a film about that story, no matter what it took. And it took a lot, just as it took a lot to undam those rivers. But I'm so grateful to also be able to share the message that you can win, and that the Elwha River is an example of that, and that the care and intention that I found bringing to that river goes far, far back to my own roots and experiences in other places, but that ever since I have made my media making life around water issues and water protection here in the Pacific Northwest, the land that I've grown to love. And it's truly a deep pleasure to be around activists such as the ones I've worked with and to hear your stories. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Carri LeRoy. I'm a member of the faculty here at Evergreen, and like Jessica mentioned, I'm beyond humbled to be here. I hope that if you have questions about river function, I can provide a scientific perspective, but I want to recognize the fact that that scientific perspective is limited by the limitations of science, and science can only answer certain questions for us, and it can't answer everything. My inspiration to study rivers goes back to, I think a lot of us have these stories of being a child and being in awe somewhere. For me, it was anywhere that water was moving. I grew up in Oregon, and my family spent a lot of time, because we didn't have a lot of money, outside camping along the North Saniam, along the Metolius, along rivers that have gripped my heart. And as I studied in the typical academic way, I always tried to find connections to rivers. And I was really lucky to find myself in northern Arizona, where Louise Benally is from, where water is so important. And I told everyone that I wanted to do my PhD in freshwater ecology, and they told me I was crazy, because there's no water in Arizona. Why would I study water in Arizona? But because it's so scarce, it's so important there. It's important here. It's important everywhere. But it gave me a really healthy sense of the precious nature of rivers and riparian zones and the fact that they are ribbons of biodiversity, that there's more to rivers than you can see when you walk to the edge. So the parts of the river that I was inspired by as a child are just the tip of the iceberg, so to say, or so to speak. That rivers extend far beneath your feet into the hyporheic zone. And I think that's part of what makes them so difficult to understand, is that so much of what allows them to function is invisible to us. And so requires us to dig a little deeper and ask questions. I've had the great honor and pleasure of working alongside restoration projects, working with scientists on the Elwand River as we work to understand what does the removal of two massive dams on a river that is otherwise draining a pristine landscape mean? How does the removal of those two dams influence the function of the river, how it processes nutrients and biodiversity? I've also had the great pleasure of working in Arizona. Sometimes you have to partner with agencies. Sometimes you have to fight against agencies, but sometimes you have to partner with agencies that you might find odd bedfellows. So in Arizona, partnered with the Bureau of Reclamation to restore cottonwood riparian forests up and down the Colorado River, massive gallery forests of cottonwoods that grow so fast you'd be shocked. So I had the great pleasure of working there and dedicating my life to understanding rivers and how they're connected to the forests that surround them. So I'll leave that there. Thank you.
Good morning, I guess, everyone. I hope everyone's doing good today. Hope everyone's awake on this nice rainy day. As I said, my name's Willie Frank III. I'm a Nisqually Tribal Council member, but more important, I'm a fisherman on the Nisqually River. The Nisqually tribe, we manage 80 miles from Mount Rainier to the mouth of the Nisqually River. And I don't know if too many people have been on the Nisqually, but it's one of the most beautiful places you'll see in the world, I feel like. And, our mountain is Tukwotma, we call our mountain. And that means don't forget the water. And my grandfather, Willie Frank Sr., he lived to be 104 years old. And he used to talk about paradise. The Nisqually Indians lived in paradise at the mouth of the river all the way up to the mountain. And I always think back because he was born in 1879. So I think about what would it be like in 1879, and here we are in 2018. And you think about what it looked like back then. I honestly believe we all lived in paradise. You know, the water was clean, the air was clean, our food was clean, everything we put into our bodies was clean. And you're seeing such a change right now in society. As I said, I'm a fisherman, and I fish along the Nisqually River. My father, Billy Frank Jr., lived to be 83 years old, and he was still fishing with us on the Nisqually at 82 years old. And you'd see the passion he had for our salmon, for our water, for our environment. And he spent his whole life protecting that and fighting for that, to give myself and everybody in this room a better life. And you're seeing the impacts of climate change. You're seeing the impacts of population growth. You're seeing the impacts of I-5 on our river, on our sound, our beautiful Puget Sound here. And, we spend a lot of time going back and forth with the state of Washington, and even more time with the federal government, because we have an administration right now in Washington, D.C. that doesn't see the environment as being an issue. And it's really sad to see that, because I always tell people I don't want to be that generation where I'm holding a picture of a salmon and telling my kids one day, hey, this is what we used to catch on the Nisqually River. This is what your grandpa used to catch. This is what your great-grandpa used to catch. And that all ties into water, clean water. We need clean water in this life, in this world that we live in. And, I feel like at times we all take water for granted at times. And to hear our elder from Northern Arizona talk about that, it means a lot to hear that, because, we sit here in the state of Washington and we look outside and we see the beautiful green trees, we see the rain, so we think we have an unlimited amount of water. But I'm here to tell you guys that that's not the truth, because with the economic and the growth in the state, people come up here not understanding the history about who we are as Washingtonians, but more or less of Native people. We're managers of the resources. We're managers of the land. And the science is good. The science is great. But our tribal members and our elders and our people know when our salmon is healthy, when our water is healthy, and when our air are healthy. And, as I said, fishing on the Nisqually River, we're always in a battle with the state over salmon. And it's really unfortunate because we're fighting over every last salmon right now. And I always tell people that for me, it's not catching every last salmon. As I said, I don't want to be that generation that catches the last fish. But what I tell people, being on that river is for me, it's like going to church. It's like being able to set that net, being able to exercise our treaty rights and our way of life. That's more important to me than this almighty dollar that we have. And I try to educate our younger generation about your culture, about your treaty right, about tribal sovereignty, because that's really the issue that we're dealing with. And as a tribal leader, I try to get folks to understand that it can't be just the tribes fighting for the environment. It has to be all of us working together. And, I tell people that. I tell them that, it's got to be now. We have to start making a difference. What we're doing now is going to affect the next 80 and 100 years out. You heard Ed talk about the seventh generation. I grew up with one of the greatest teachers in the world, Willie Frank Jr. He taught me every day about what it was to walk in this world. And, I tell these politicians and these different folks that you guys are only here for a short period of time. The Nisqually tribe, the Medicine Creek tribes, the tribes throughout the United States, we're going to be here forever. We've been here since the beginning. We're going to be here till the end. But we need to really start coming together and protecting this beautiful Mother Earth and the environment that we have. I'm just happy to be here today, sitting up here with this great panel. So I thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rosebud White Plume. I'm from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota. I'm happy to be here. I can't be sitting here because of my baby, but she sure has a lot to say. Her name is Angel. She lost a sock somewhere. My family is involved in a lot of the forefronts of water protection in South Dakota. My mom is Deb White Plume, and my dad is Alex White Plume. He's one of the first hemp farmers in America. I don't know if anybody knows of him, but water protection it should just be everybody's job. Everybody drinks water. We all use it. One time my son, who's 6 years old now, he said, we were talking about water protection, and he said, well, why doesn't everybody protect water if we're not going to have it? And that's just so simple, It's like, why isn't it important to everybody? A lot of people would rather have money, but you can't eat money, you can't drink it. One day they'll understand that, and hopefully that won't be for a long time. I can't speak too much. I suffered a loss in the last week at home that keeps me from public speaking, but I just wanted to introduce myself to you guys, and I'm really happy to be here. And on this panel is a great honor. Tiokasin and Louise, my mom just called me and told me to give you guys her love. I don't know if she's watching, but she might be. Thank you.
Before I forget, I wanted to let you guys know. I don't know if you know that Nestle is after your water here in Washington. Did you know that? Does anybody here know that? Okay, yeah. So those of you that are, wanting to do something, you better start now. And then we don't know exactly which spring, but we can assume they're going to go after all of them, whichever ones they can get along the Columbia River. So I would suggest contacting the governor and all the state agencies and making sure that they know that you don't want Nestle in your state. And I would even contact maybe somebody here knows the water scientists that can figure out, we don't even want people to know where the springs are on our Columbia River. The elders said, don't show them, these things, because, then next thing they're going to be gone. So, but if you hear, of them approaching a city council somewhere in one of the towns, they always go after a small town, it seems like. Then, you might even spend some time just calling those, pick 5 towns, each of you pick 5 towns and call them and ask them, is Nestle approaching you? You would have to probably start right now, because their name is not Nestle Waters Northwest for anything. That's their regional name. We stopped them from Cascade Locks and over here to Washington at Walla Walla, Waitsburg, and then in Golden Dale. The Yakima tribal members just filled up the council hall there, and they didn't even get any farther. So I just wanted to say that, let you know, make sure you are prepared. Thank you.
Wow. I really don't have a story to add to this, but I think what important is out there, because I travel a lot and get a lot of perspective worldwide with indigenous folks all over the world. And one thing that they hold in common is their traditional way, not so much the education of the West. Some of you know that the etymology of educate, what it really means is to draw out or lead away. It really means educe or seduce. The etymology is to draw out or lead away from ... or ellipsis, but it really means spirit. And to replace with knowledge and information. Now, who is this knowledge and information controlled by? Is it the West? Is it who we are as Native peoples? Is it our knowledge and, as you call it, wisdom? But wisdom is always at the love of spirit. And so if you're not aware of how active Native people have been even before 1492, that we're still, in light of all the things that are happening to the earth, we're still, and the word that I heard almost in a common here was fighting. It's almost like we're at war against a language and a consciousness, or even a system that's at war against the earth. So when I think about this, where does that leave us? But are we battle weary that we have to maybe stop all of this and going to that place in the United States Capitol called Washington, almost said Redskins, Washington, D.C., where I do know, because of the history of studying here at its Evergreen College, that there is a Lenape burial ground right underneath the U.S. Capitol dome. So when we understand these things from the deep level of the earth where we come from, it's almost that you have to understand that as Native people, traditionally, we've been uploading the DNA of the earth consistently, rather than some downloading sky god type of thing. But the combination of that, now it's here. So when I talk to people like Louise, and we talk about the feeling that we exchange here in the consciousness, and what I wanted to ask is, the actions that we often are doing. I think about what if we didn't have telephones? What if we didn't have the cars? What if we are able to do Facebook and all that other technological stuff that we think that will always be here? Because I always think about the scenario that someone's going to shut it off. then what are we doing? Do we really care enough? Because we are changing the world because of technology, but isn't technology changing us about how we see the world? So when you go back to the spiritual fire that we all understand here, Willie talked about it. We all talked about what we do here but you have to take this consciousness, this awareness out there too, because when you go around the world, the other peoples know about the native peoples here. And I could think that they really don't care less about America, except that it's a dream that hasn't really come true yet. It's because of the lack of recognition of the knowledge and information that Native people still retain regardless. So I think the next question that I'm leading to is, what makes us tick? What makes us still go on as old as we are? We're still doing this. And are we really successful yet? Is it an ongoing fight all the time? Why are we using fighting language when it's really about peace with Earth? So the peace with Earth is what this language is talking about. When we speak our languages, we're talking about the peace with Earth. And I will introduce that in a way that I was told by an elder, Virgil Kilstraight, from Pine Ridge, and he's Hunkpapa in Oglala. He basically, I was sitting in the middle of Auschwitz and Birkenau in 2013. And we had a little ceremony, and we came out, and the first thing I asked him, I said, Uncle Lakshmi, do we have a word in Lakota for domination? And he quickly said, there's no word, there's no concept. We can't even allow that thought into a relational language. You see, so it's not built on dominating and putting fences up and dividing and how much something's going to cost and measuring. It's built on the relationship with water, with the land, with the plants and animals, these nations, other nations first. Because if we don't recognize the tree nation that's strong here, the water nation, the fish nation, the bird nation, then what are we recognizing but our own anthropocentric way of viewing life, that it's only about us humans? You see, that we have to save the earth rather than allowing the earth, which she's already doing, to save us. You see, and I think that's what is a mainstay among, I feel it among the panel here. And if you all want to, join in with this thought process, that would, convey it to you this way as elders or people who are doing rather than becoming. And I should preface this with this, is that in this language, there's no to be. That's a verb, but it's no to be in our language. To be what? When you already are, you see. So with that groundwork and conversation, if you could add to that, that would be awesome.
I think, I was thinking back to when you were talking about fighting. That's what I was always taught. My family and many of our local people, they went through the fishing wars here in the 60s and 70s. So they were fighters, and we're in a different time now. It's not time to fight anymore. We don't need to be so defensive and fight, and I feel like the Washington tribes are always trying to sit at the table with the state and the federal government, but at times we do need to, we do need to fight, whether it's in court or whether it's, in the meeting rooms, and the tribes here in the state are 9-0 against the Supreme Court, and you have, unfortunately, we have to continue to educate people, and we have an attorney general right now who decides he wants to fight tribal treaty rights and sovereignty, and it's unfortunate because these are supposed to be the allies we're working with to make everybody's life better. And you're right. I don't like using that word fight, because we're all human beings. We're all here. We're all Washingtonians. We all come from different cultures, backgrounds, religions. But at the end of the day, we need to all be here protecting the environment and protecting what Mother Earth and the Creator gave us.
Thank you, Willie. Well, I sure am proud of Willie. I watched this young man really rise above a lot of conflict in his life. And I was proud to spend a number of years with Billy, Willie's dad, mentored under him as a commissioner with the Northwest Indian Fish Commission, but way back before that, in a conversation at one of our elders' funerals. And we were talking about my grandma, Lena Hilaire, over in Suquamish, whose service we were attending. And Billy was recalling in front of the federal court, and grandma was on the witness stand, and Billy's dad was sitting out in the front row, and grandma was asking Willie Frank, he says, and they were talking Indian. And Slade Gordon, who was then the Attorney General, objected. And Judge Bolt said, overruled. Said, if Grandma doesn't understand and Grandpa can help her understand, then it's overruled. And this was kind of a story that led into another conversation right there when we were going in to have a meal after the service, and we talked about the berry fields over here between Puyallup and Sumner, and that triangle in there with Ording, where all the Indians went. And we populated the berry fields, and we picked berries. And big, large encampments from all over. And what we were doing is we were surviving. This is what we had to do. This was before the Bolt decision, many, many years, where our off-reservation fishing rights were affirmed, guaranteed under the Constitution, the supreme law of the land. Decision in 1974, affirmed in 79, founded on the Constitution and treaties with the United States. I believe it's Article 8, the Constitution, bonding us together in a road that would lead at least 20 years with Billy, and circling back to how proud I am of Willie and his stepping up and his leadership, because I won't be here forever. None of us will. And these stories have to come, and they have to be memorialized, because you can't go into the future if you don't know about your past. And I'd like to also acknowledge my daughter, who's up in this room. She's an Evergreen student. She's a mother of a 2-year-old, works full-time for the Northwest Indian Fish Commission. And I'm very proud of my daughter Alice, and she will carry on the voice of our family when I no longer can. But that's going to be a long wait, sweetheart. This subject I heard in this discussion about the dams and the Elwha Dam. You know, I don't think I ever was accused of being a prolific reader. I learned a lot from my family's long line of tribal leaders. As Willie's grandfather was born in 1879, my grandfather on my mother's side was born in 1877 on Dungeness Spit, Jamestown, Sklallam. My grandmother was born on my mother's side in 1898 in Hoe River. And the things they saw are unbelievable, undescribable. I wholeheartedly believe what Willie's grandfather imparted to them about living in paradise is exactly true. And the undoing of that paradise is tied to the Elwha Dam, because that was in that time period where the biggest influx that changed us in this Northwest, in Puget Sound and the coast, was the timber barons. The timber barons that had family ties to 1492 and the colonization of the New England states was timber. Then they moved to the Deep South. And then they moved to the Great Lakes. And in around the mid-1800s, they made it to the West Coast, up into San Francisco Bay, into Humboldt, then on up into the Straits of Juan de Fuca. And many of your streets in Seattle are named after these lumber barons, and so Yesler had a sawmill here, and so whatever had another sawmill there. And names like Asa Simpson, Pope and Talbot, Weyerhaeuser. These are the folks that had that history of deforestation over time and came into the Pacific Northwest. The Elwha Dam, it was noted that was built without fish passage, but if you read about the Elwha Dam, there were a couple of lead people that were advocates for the Elwha Dam, and they knew good and well, because it had to test the time in other dams and facilities, that fish passage was to be included in any kind of planning for a dam. And you look at the Elwha and you look at other dams in the Pacific Northwest that were built without fish passage. You'll read that there were folks with the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, actually it was the Department of Fisheries back then, that had noted that and advocated for, and were quite frankly adamant that fish passage was to be included, but it all came down to politics and money and power. Industrial water was needed for the lumber mills and for the pulp mill. And that story is kind of all over the West. The recovery from that is also starting to be written all over the rest of the West in removal of dams like the Elwha, and noted a couple other dams. And then and thankfully down in Northern California, they're talking about removal of at least a couple of more dams. They're just not needed. And there's a lot tied to the tribes and treaty rights and water that are very helpful in those arguments. One of the things that Willie and I we sit together as commissioners of the Northwest Indian Fish Commission, that listening to Willie, I think what he was bringing out is what we're facing is in our efforts for salmon recovery, and water rights, and the look that we've had to employ people to come in and work with us to really to call out the fact that we're doing this important work. And when we're calling on these experts, one of the things that through the research that they're doing is a lot of people in Washington State don't even realize that we're still here. That tribes, Indians, Native Americans, indigenous peoples, the first people, we're still here. So that's part of our messaging. And I heard it from Willie, and he reminded me of it, that's one of the things that we are going to work on here in the state of Washington, and quite frankly on a national level, is that we're still here and we're not going anywhere. Despite all that has happened through history of contact, the westward expansion and the idea that we were discovered, and then all these things that were foreign to us were brought to us. Principle among them, and in the founding documents, and you see it embedded in the Constitution. And you look at the way legal the legal structure is when they talk about these different doctrines. And those are religious doctrines that they brought to us. And they're very hard for us to work through. And in my readings and my interpretation, and I'm probably using a wrong term, but it's like they're trying to sanitize their actions using these kinds of permissions to do what they did to inflict upon us indigenous people, not only in North America, but Central America and South America and all across the South Pacific and the Pacific and everywhere they went in the name of. And we're still here despite all things that this country has done to us, including not putting in a proper history of that whole tyranny that they've brought into us. We're still here, and we're not going anywhere. There's 26 tribes in the state of Washington, 20 with treaty rights, 21 with treaty rights, 20 under the Northwest Indian Fish Commission, 5 treaty areas, Medicine Creek, Elliott, Point No Point, Macaw, Treaty of Olympia, or Quinault. Think our leaders, our ancestors that had the understanding to know to come to the treaty discussions with Isaac Stevens and sign those treaties in 1854 and 1855. Or perhaps we would not still be here. I'm glad that Willie had the opportunity to speak and remind me that part of our message is we're still here. The first inhabitants of North America are still here in what we call the United States. And I would also add, because I thought I heard mention of being in probably Belgium, Holland, or Germany, and I was recalling my own dad and my own stepdad, who was a Quinault, full-blood Quinault, 101st Airborne, European Theater, all 4 major jumps in that campaign. My own dad graduated high school in 1940, fought his way through Europe, come in the south of France, 142nd Airborne, or 142nd Rainbow Warriors, combat engineers, fought with General George Patton through entire campaign through Europe, France, Belgium, Holland, Austria, Germany. The first to fight the American Indians in unparalleled numbers. I was reminded of that when I was at a ceremony commemorating the 100th anniversary to the armistice of World War I in Honolulu the other day at the War Memorial. Just by chance, what a wonderful event. November 11th, 1918, 11:11 a.m. I'm proud to be a Quinault Indian, and we're still here.
Well, the battle continues. To me, treaty does not mean anything. It has not done anything except take our rights away and to be kept in a prison known as reservations. And there we have no rights whatsoever. Everything that is thrown at us through the so-called court system has never worked for my community. You know, we challenged many cases and it's always against us because it's an instrument of the empire. The imperial world wants to dominate and control and consume and colonize. So then you're there catering, being told what to do and how to do it. And for me, the battle is every day. And my supreme law of the land is not a man-made law. My supreme law of the land is the earth itself, the water, the fire, and the air. That's what I was taught. That's all I can give power to. And we still hold our weapon. As long as we hold our weapon, we're who we are, regardless of who's trying to dominate us. As long as we don't accept that, don't allow that, it will, we either acknowledge it or we just draw a line and say no. And I did that already. So for me, that's a battle that's ongoing. Like I said, we've gone through the court systems. We've gone through the legislative procedures. They want that land for its resources and there's no justice in it. So we continue. We mobilize. We've been, fighting this battle since 50 years ago and even beyond. And so as long as we have our songs, our prayers, our ways, which are not regulated by the so-called system, we're fine as long as we don't allow that to dominate us. And so that's, where we stand. And many times we're alone only with our natural world, with the whole world against us. But do we bow down and, hang in there and say, please, No, we don't. We ignore. We ignore that. I ignore that. I don't give it any power because I was told the sun is your father, the earth is your mother. The mountains are your rulers. The waters are your rulers. That's the only law that you're going to live by as a woman. And you're going to pass that to the next generation, to the next generation. So I travel, I get told, come over here, help us. So I spread the message and continue to do so. And so, we're in a crucial time in our stories. These so-called fossil fuels were, in the past, they were living beings, and some of them were things that we didn't want to face as humans. They were put away. But if we should come dig it out and make it live again, it's going to come and destroy us because they were set in those places where they are now for a reason. And so to dig them out and make power with it and, it's comfortable and all, but there's an ending result, and that's what we're dealing with now. And so that's how I see it. I know I have no place in this so-called Western system. I'm not recognized. My community's not recognized. We don't have a tribal council that represents us or speaks for us because they're token Indians that are already sold out. They're given money so that they could give our way of life up to the energy companies that are destroying our Mother Earth. And we have to speak out and say no. And that's where we are in my community. And a lot of times people are confused, and so we try to educate our young ones, but most times, they want to be the empire. They want to be that is totally opposed to us. And, but when they can't go make that next step, who do they go back to? They go home. They want a prayer. They want a ceremony. And that's when they get told, this is why you were told at one time, this is who you are, what you are. And you can only be this one. You can't be that one because it's not going to happen. So I see that in many places. I've been to the United Nations. I've been through the U.S. court system. I've been in jail many times. And yet, my love is for the land, for the trees, for our natural springs, for the water, and for our future generation and our survival, because that's the only thing that we really are. These other things are made up and they can be changed anytime, so they're not real in that sense. So, thank you.
Everybody's looking at each other, right? Who's going to be next?
Hey, I'll say something real quick.
All right, yeah.
Oh, can you hear me? Oh, okay. I bet everybody up here's been asked this question before, and maybe some of you out there, when people will say to you, what do you think you're trying to do, save the world? So somebody asked me that when I was doing one of the fasts, and I go, that's exactly what I'm trying to do, and that's what you should be doing too. So that question that they would, people would ask that kind of mad, but really now today, that's exactly what we are doing for real. We have to you know, or I don't know where are we gonna live. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, and maybe people got questions now. I don't know.
Yeah, I want to, ask the two professionals, I guess they'd call you two. I'm not too sure, but we're all professionals. I don't know, but one thing that I really thought about as Louise and Ed and Clarice and Willie were speaking, and I've often confronted this even here, and all my life, going to boarding school and all to try to understand why we were forced to think a certain way, had to live for a certain way, and why they're still continuing. And at the base of this is because that we knew something. In third grade, we had a test given to us as a natural sciences test. And if those of us who are older remember giving us a natural science test. And 95, all the native students in my class we passed at a 95 percentile. And we were all said to be, our result was that we were functioning at a level of 11th grade as third graders. Is because that's the world we came from. It's not that distant from us. And I thought about this later as I was going on. Why is it now that people are getting distance from the earth, really, the movements and watching all of these natural motions of Mother Earth? And I thought about the illusion that we have to have us think and do things a certain way in order to get along, and say the certain things in order to get along, and not really say what we wanted to, what our hearts were speaking. And I thought about this thing called the Stockholm Syndrome, like you don't bite the hand that feeds you. And so we became very timid in our times and in those places. But we had to do things accordingly to this so-called illusion of a power. So it created this aura of Western authority that we have to go to a reference point. And we say we go to DC or we go to the foreign governments. And yet I think about what happens if we didn't go there. We could say, well, that's not reality now, Tiokasin. You have to go to the government. We have to go to school. We have to do these things that we're forced to do as Native people, and all the time leaving ourselves behind. But I think that's where the world is coming to now, the realization that Indigenous peoples hold this gem of knowledge and information. And if anything else is the ceremony, and you could call it sacredness, and all that means is secret. And I heard about the earth in some places hiding her secrets now because no one respects them, no one acknowledges them. So what in practice, in our daily lives, what I do may not be room enough in this society. There's no room for Native people in this society. We have to join it in order to function. But why is there room for all of you in our societies? You see, the thought is much bigger. Why didn't we have written languages? Do we have to have written languages to understand the earth? In other words, A to Z does not define consciousness. So their languages are so much bigger outside of the confines of A to Z and democracy and all these things. So when I think about what does water do, I go personally to someone who doesn't lie to me. It's in the morning. It's a practice that I've been doing most of my life with a little tobacco, Chun Li. I go to the earth. I go to the ground, to the water, to the tree, to the birds, to the sky. She doesn't lie to me. And when I go to the authority of the West, you have to play that forked tongue mindset. It's a very binary world to get the right answer, you see. So I think it's a traction that we've gained as Indigenous folks to really understand that if we continue this way as we are, we will be here So when I hear signs out there, of course, radio says a lot of different opinions and thought processes out of New York City. So the thought processes that I often think about is that it's the end of the world, and people don't even know what they're saying, because all world means is a way of life. But are we as indigenous peoples trying to join that way of life and say we're all human beings, and yet we're not knowing how to act as beings anymore? We're just humans. And we don't even know the etymology, the definition of what human means. In the Black's Law Dictionary, you should look it up. That's up to you. So I think about this aura, and going to in New Zealand and in Ecuador, in places around the world, their governments or their peoples are really demanding, the indigenous peoples, in that confines of the government, they're saying, give this river rights. Give this river a right to be a being. That's what it's come to. But that's another world. This is, like you would say, the Northwest. But that water that falls here is the same water that falls in South Dakota, that falls in Pakistan, everywhere else. And that's how we are really connection, the unification that we see, the process of water. And I think about that. What, should we give rivers rights to exist? Is it our practice? Is it our prayers that we say as Native people? Or do we keep instilling this aura of Western authority that we have to go to you in order to get our answers or a piece of the action? In other words, everybody wants a piece of the American pie, but they really don't say it. But I was reminded that maybe they should be reminded that they forget to remember who owns the bakery. You see? And in that sense, in the ownership that we don't have in our concept, you don't share it, it's always given. So are we giving ourselves to Earth? Are we going to the one source, not a resource, but the source of life through water, the consciousness of water? Are we asking her rather than demanding from her? So the difference, I think, without division, is that we need to continue to ask without expecting a yes all the time from the Mother Earth. And it's through our ceremonies, and I would say that only because I've experienced other ceremonies with other Native peoples, and also went to church, and I did those things. But I had a Western an authority figure, and that really didn't work for me, because I always went to the one being that never lies to me, is the earth. Mm-hmm. And I want to set that up and open conversation up with whoever wants to join that.
One of the programs, I would like to start maybe with a question from one of the programs that's watching remotely, if that's okay. Is that good? Okay, so this is from the food justice class. How does your work connect to efforts for food sovereignty? And in what ways is the movement for food autonomy important to efforts around water protection and restoration? What steps can communities take to support Native-led efforts for food sovereignty?
I think as far as food sovereignty goes, for myself, corn pollen. That's my sovereignty as the net person. And water is an essential element for all life. So where I come from, there's limited water. And so we do ceremonies to bring water. And all that is being interfered with by whoever makes those chemtrails up there. And manipulate or, destroy the natural clouds. So that we need justice in that. Whoever the agency that is doing that needs to be challenged. And also that food is what we are. We are food. So every
plant in my region is medicine or food, and it can be both depending on how you approach it. And so it's being violated right now, and this is one thing that really is not right. When my people were captivated in the mid-1800s, when they were being released after 4 years, the Spaniards brought sheep, and each family that was leaving were given a female and a male, and those they had to take care of, and they were told also to become farmers. And so they went home, they planted, and they took care of the sheep, so those multiplied. And then by the mid 1930s, the livestock reduction program came in, and the sheep, the horses, the cattle, whatever they had, were wiped out to a very small number. And that's ongoing today in my community. We are held at gunpoint by BIA police while our animals are rounded up and hauled off. And as of today, 2018, that is happening. And so, and then we're told if you go and hunt, you need a paper to say that it's okay for you to hunt. But, we were gatherers and hunters long before these so-called policies came about. So people go out and get what they need. And then now they're spraying them. They're telling us, oh, those and those animals, they have plagues. They're going to make you sick, But of course, who's behind that sickness? It's them again. So that's a challenge. And that's a challenge that we're dealing with. And now we have a beast in Washington, D.C. that's out of control. And there's a bunch of followers that want to destroy what is known as reservations and give it out for energy development, energy extraction. We have a place in southern Utah where all our medicinal plant for cancer grows, for different types. And that's under siege right now, known as the Bear Ears National Monument. We have a sacred place also in New Mexico known as the Chaco Canyon National Park. That's under siege too, also by oil and gas development. That is where some of our prayers and songs come from. The people in the last civilization, as I was told, were wiped out because they made a mistake. Something that they were instructed not to do, they did, and so they were wiped out. And that's where we're headed to. And so, we need to remind each other there are certain things that we're not supposed to do as humans. And this is instruction that were given to us by our makers, the creators that made us. We came with certain instructions. And so we have to live by those instructions and honor that. And that's what brings us to using this, using that, using this, and having a certain protocol with those things. And all those are being violated. So the food sovereignty is a good movement because it's bringing back those knowledges. We're restoring some of the lands that have been taken by us. As of 2017, we were out in Colorado by Blanca. That's our eastern boundary. We reclaimed, we built a hogan, and I was honored to be with a lot of young folks that made that happen. Over this past summer, we made 2 sweat lodges, our style, the nest style sweat lodges. So I got to take them on a plant walk. So we gathered, I showed them which piece of the plants are used and, how they're used, and we took baths. And these are kids that have college graduates. They felt lost. They're very academically, well off. They got their degrees, but they felt lost because they didn't have a sense of what their culture was, other than knowing what clan they were. Beyond that, so now we're talking, and I have some pictures, but I don't have them with me. I have it, but then I can't have a way to show it to you. But we went back to the grinding stones that were left 300 years ago when we were plucked out of the Colorado mountains by the Spanish government when they were occupying the Southwest. So we found some of those tools, and I have them with me, and we use those to show them, how it's used. So to me, that was like, we took a step back, and here we are, ready or not. We're here, and we're always going to be here, like these brothers say. So that's our sovereignty.
I think what food sovereignty means to me and our people, our tribes on the Columbia River. We're hunters and gatherers, always were, and we still have 9 roots and foods that we gather. And I'd just like to just say, to be respectful of that. Don't try to go out and learn about our foods and how to gather them and where to find them, and pretty soon they'll be in the health food stores like that. These foods were given to our people here, on the river, all those roots, and we keep it secret. Even when one of our leaders told somebody, they seen it on the Facebook, someone was taking a picture of one of the sites where we dig, told them, don't do that, don't do that, because it's for our health. In doing some reading and listening to people in the outside world talk about health and food and things like that, and that people are supposed to eat what their ancestors ate. So where your ancestors are from, you should try to find those foods. But be respectful of our foods. We're already under attack with our huckleberries that have been commercialized. That's just heartbreaking. I never thought the day would come I'd see that. We didn't have control of it when they commercialized our salmon in the early 1900s, and then I never thought just 7 years ago they commercialized our huckleberries, and now we go to the longhouses and there are always jars of huckleberries, and now there's a little bowl like this, just a little bowl. And back in the 80s, when a lot of Californians are moving up in ranchers, and that's where we dig our roots and gather our other foods. So the Forest Service came to the tribes, and we'll take all your elders out and you show us all the places. I would drive our elders, and others would drive the elders too, and we'd go out and they would show the Forest Service, this is where we dig. It's a large, huge area, really, a lot of different places. And they said they would try to help, so we could maintain those areas. But it didn't happen. The ranchers moved in and their cattle, destroy the roots like that. And sometimes it'd be humiliating. I wouldn't want to do it, but I would do it because my elders would tell me, go knock on their door and ask, can we go in? So I would do that. So I would just say, to be respectful of, Native people, our own chosen ways, the ways that were given to us through our ancestors, and for our health. We need those foods. We don't want to see them in the health food stores like our part of our spiritual practice, our medicines. I talked a little bit last night about it. I'm not going to name them here. You probably know what they are, but you weren't supposed to know. Like my brother here said, those are sacred, meaning secret. And sacred seems to be a hard word for greater society to understand. It means leave it alone. Just leave it alone. And so that's all I would. I was talking about it last night, though. And I go into the health food stores and I take those medicines. I'll talk to them first in a good way and then try to explain to them. And then, you know, sometimes they'll go, oh, yeah, I'm so sorry. You know, I didn't know. I believe once people, if they hear, you know, talk in a good way and understand the importance of those things to our people and our cultural preservation, most people, you know, get it. And then some don't, so I have to just take it. And I do. I take it. And working on stopping that. I never ever thought I'd see the day that our medicines would be sold in health food stores. Don't buy it. Boycott it. Don't buy it. Don't use it. Don't name it. Those are sacred to us. And you were never supposed to know about these things. We are the ones who suffer when we disrespect, dishonor the teachings of our ancestors in this way. So for our sake, you know, be respectful so we don't suffer. And call the health food stores, tell them, you know, don't sell that. That's sacred to the indigenous people. Leave that medicine alone. Now those herbs are endangered. Now even we'll get a ticket if we go out and pick them. And yet in the health food stores, they're selling them all over. So, you know, that's a new development. And that's big to us. Maybe to some it doesn't mean anything, but it's really big to us. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
We're going to take live questions rather than the list. So we have the students. So we have like half an hour or so, but we want to engage the students for questions, and that would be good.
We have a lot of that happening since our struggles, like 50 years old or more. You know, we've been battling forever. And the first wave of support were just, that's how I learned how to speak English, from the hippies. And they were the sweetest of the sweet, you know. A lot of them are gone now, but they understood and had conscience. And I didn't really speak English. Every time I tried to say a word, it would come out wrong. And it was sad because my mother, she decided that she had kids, you know, some of them got taken from her at an early age. And then when they returned home, they didn't know how to do anything basic. So based on that, she said, that was her thing about it, you know. They can't think for themselves, she said. So then she says, oh, we're going to keep her for the sheep. So we're sheep herders. So I, you know, grew up herding sheep, and we had to make our own food at a very early age, you know, like 5, 6 year old. She leaves you, she goes to her cornfield. She was a horse lady. She had a lot of wild horses, and she'll tie you onto a wild horse and tell you, take it to the water hole, you know, like you're supposed to know. And I had to jump off the horse a lot of times because the horse were like determined to knock me off, you know. They run towards the lowest branch. So, you know, that there's that kind of life. It's not always, you know, nice and sweet and you're cuddled, you know. There was a lot of toughness with it. So anyways, my sister came back and she was trained to be a social worker, I guess, you know, and she was gone forever. And I met her when I was like 11 years old, and she didn't know how to build a fire. And it was like, oh, she doesn't know how to make dough either, you know, stuff like that. Because of education, she went to the boarding school, and there, you know, it's a whole different life from what is at home. So then there was a big difference. And so anyways, the hippies, you know, they came and they said, oh, you say this cup give me a cup, nice, real sweet, they nurture you. And that's how I learned. And slowly, and then came AIM, and AIM was like, I had never seen, this is the early mid-70s, and they were people with long hair, and that's been out of the question on my reservation for a long time. Everybody had short shaved hair, men-wise. Everybody's a cowboy, and they go to rodeos. And so that's all I've known growing up, men to be. And then these guys came in, they had long hair, they had hair buns, and we were like, whoa, who are they? And the thing was, they didn't speak our language. There was a language barrier. And so, but we learned a lot of good things from them, how to advocate for ourselves. And then the next wave is the environmental people, our own people that were concerned about what was going on. And I guess they were media people. They always had questions. And because we didn't speak English, we didn't want to be near them. We were, I guess, savages in some ways, the way they were referring to us, we didn't want to be talked to or spoken to because we couldn't communicate. It was hard. It was not easy. And slowly that changed, and it was hard, it was a challenge. And after so long, I met my children's father. He was not Navajo, he was Cherokee, but he understood what I was trying to say, but he could speak really good English. So he would help me communicate with my supporters that came to my home. And then, eventually a lot of other Native people from other places came. That's how I met Tiokasin. I met Swan Eagle, and just the changes. And my elders got older and older, and I saw the health impacts where a lot of it was the kidney problem because of the water. A lot of it was the respiratory problem because of the air. And we were in a toxic world by then because we're right near a open, big coal pit mine operated by Peabody Coal. And that was the reason why our land had been signed away. The tribal governments agreed to Peabody Energy to give that land to them. They can destroy the land, they can take all the water they want, but yet we did not have access to those things. And that's what made me mad and made me realize that I needed to communicate to the world community so that I could spread the message. And then my mom and father didn't speak English at all. They didn't go to school at all. So it was a whole different world that was confronting us with the need that they have, which is the Western culture. And the legislative process, they already signed the papers, like she was saying. The tribal councils, gave up the land. And then they made up this law that, these people, they're villagers, but they suddenly owned the land and was under them. And because of that, they could implement any kind of policy. So then BIA helped, and they made it really harsh to where we get no services from any of the tribal government, Navajo or Hopi. And then the BIA, they're all in that corner against us, and the feds and the state. And so, Barry Goldwater and Hillary Rodham Clinton wrote that policy. And so she was your age, maybe younger, but she was a law student, an intern for Barry Goldwater from Arizona, who was a U.S. Senator. And so they saw that there were resources that they wanted, so then they developed that policy. So then, that became enacted, and then all our human rights got taken away through that, with the help of American Indian Movement through International Indian Treaty Council. We were able to go to the United Nations to advocate on our own behalf. Starting in 1981, we went there in 1982, you know, our elders went there, and we did what we could. Then we challenged the courts, and we didn't get any justice. Every time we went to court, it was ruled against us. And so to this day, we still don't have justice. But the only thing that matters to me and my community, we're still on the land. We're still holding out. We don't need your services, but we need our Mother Earth. So that's where we're at. Thank you.
I'll just add real quick, so there's probably more questions. It's important, there's a couple of things you should keep in mind when you're working with Native people on these issues. I know I'm going to go out on a limb here, as they say, by telling you this, but I guess, as I've been told before, well, somebody needed to say it. But what most Native people find is the number one annoyance is too many questions. Don't ask questions about our spiritual practices. Those are really sacred to us, and we keep them to ourselves the way we were instructed to do through our ancestors. And each tribe, people, our tribal peoples, have their own spiritual practice that was given to them. And it's not meant for, you know, our Columbia River ways. I'm not going to name our ceremony because it's not supposed to be named in the public. That's how our ways are. They're that sacred. There are things you don't talk about in the public, only even among our own tribe at a certain place at a certain time. There are things you only stand up in the longhouse and talk about and not out there. And I believe that the reason all of our tribal people, and I believe this applies to the whole world before Christianity, before colonization, that all the people were given a different way to worship, different spiritual practice. We don't have a word in our language for religion. That's different concept, really. And I believe the reason for that is when anything gets too big, then it gets out of control. It becomes a dominating thing. Like my brother Hill said, we don't have a word in our language for domination. So things are supposed to stay small. And the other thing, I don't know if any of you have heard of Susana Santos. She's not with us anymore. She's from Warm Springs, an activist. And this is the first thing she did. She founded the Sacred Earth Coalition in the 90s in Portland, and a lot of non-Native people, you know, to help. You know, that's good. That's good. It's not a bad thing. And I'm just telling you how it was told to me by these white ladies who were in that group for about 15 years. It lasted. And she passed away 20 years. She stood before each one of those women. And I'm not going to use the language she used. She's a real nice person, real quiet, soft-spoken. But when she had something to say, she was forceful. And she said, "You are not here to sleep with," she didn't say sleep with though. I'll let you guess the word she used. "You are not here to sleep with our men. Don't do it." And to this day, none of those women have. Unfortunately, you know, she hasn't been around to say those words because the women's always go after our men, and that's disrespectful. I've heard others say, you know, like AIM people, you come into our circle, you're not here to find a mate, okay? You know, you're here to be a support. Be respectful. We're trying to continue on our culture, and we're taught. I was taught from my grandma's Cutlass. My mother died when I was young, but, you know, you marry in your own tribe. This is about cultural preservation. It's not about racism or hate or discrimination or any of those words like that. Otherwise, you may as well call our we're federally recognized tribes is discriminatory against you guys. And now it's to the point when the non-natives, the wannabe Indians, the New Agers, the hippies they're desperate for our ways, you know, and we try to explain in a good way, no, it's not for you, you know, and then they act like we are violating their rights now, getting really aggressive with it, getting mean with it. Used to come in humble and want to learn things and be told, no, you know, this isn't for you. And I heard one Canadian woman talk years ago when I was young. She was furious, mad. You guys go around to our traditional people. You bring your expensive gifts every time you come around. And it puts our traditional people, it puts our people in an awkward position because what our social practices, the way we are before Europeans came, doesn't fit in this world society now. I'll try to give you an example. My one sister from the Pomo Res was asked to come do a talk about this very thing. And she said, we have to protect our medicine people, our spiritual leaders, because in our way, among our own people, we can't refuse when you're asked, for help, for doctoring. And so it makes it awkward, and when it's more important in our culture to give, than to receive. And so when the white people come around with all their gifts and their money, their sex, whatever you want, they offer it. And then it's hard for, in our way, when you bring our elders all these gifts, they feel like, oh, I gotta give you something back, And then they make themselves conveniently available when they know maybe there's gonna be a ceremony happening. In the early AIM days, it's told how, they're told, no, you guys, and everybody would follow that, be respectful. We're gonna do something over here, you folks can be over there, where we'll pray for you, So that's, just be respectful of that. Don't ask too many questions, and thank you.
I have one more thing to say. Can I say? So for support, we need support with the Chaco struggle. Chaco Canyon in New Mexico is under siege by fracking and oil development. So that one, you go to Frack Free New Mexico. .org, I think, is their web address. You should have, they have a call for help. And then we also have a Bare Ears resistance also calling for help. And that's in southern Utah. And I think they have a website, so you could Google that. And Black Mesa Water Coalition, we have a website also that's against the coal development, and we're going renewable. We're pushing for that more and more. So then that's the D3 organization you could plug into, and they'll help you find how you can help, because otherwise you can come to the land and be witnesses, but you're risking your lives when you do that, so be aware of that. And please try to be self-sufficient. We don't have hospitals, we don't have grocery stores. We're just out there in the boonies, We don't have electricity or running water, so be aware of that, okay? And we're just people of the land. We don't have any resources. Thank you.
And I want to just add in on the Waters Connect Us, we have a WordPress page, which I can share with all the faculty. We can post links to the ways that everyone suggests to stay connected and stay supported. So if anyone wants to share that, I can load that. Maybe we have time for just one more question, and then we have to wrap it up.
So as a tribal leader, I wouldn't want to grow up. Our youth are growing up in a tough time when it comes to the social media, the different things that they're dealing with. I always feel like they get lost a little bit when they don't have their culture, they don't have their spirituality, and they don't have their way of life, because it's that's who we are as Native people. And I go back to the salmon. You know, when we don't have our salmon, we lose a piece of us, and that's our culture. You know, we lose a piece of who we are in our heart. And we at Nisqually, we just took 10 of our youth to the National Congress of American Indians, and we've created a youth council, and it's the first time in over 20 years we've done that. So we're trying to get them more involved within the community, getting more involved with hearing their issues, hearing what might be on their mind, hearing what concerns they have for the future. Because, you know, I feel like our kids right now, I mean, it's a tough time for them with drugs, with alcohol, with, you know, depression, different issues they're dealing with. So it's up to us as tribal leaders to get them more involved and get them feeling more comfortable about who they are as natives. Because I went to public school growing up, and we didn't learn anything about Nisqually. We didn't learn anything about the tribes in the state of Washington. You know, and we have a rich history here in Washington. And as a tribal leader, I'm doing more outreach and trying to get into the schools and educate people about who we are as Native Americans. Because you know, I feel like I don't want to lose this next generation of young leaders up and coming. So I know, you know, we're trying to get more involved with our kids and our youth at Nisqually.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge the women here. They want to share a couple words, and then I just want to, I know we're all here till about 12:30, so I just want to say some closing, like, thank yous to all the programs. We're going to have some words, and Tiokasin will say some closing remarks, and then people will be here till about 1 o'clock if people wanted to visit, but I just want to be honorable of everyone's time, so thank you all again, and I want to give the microphone to these women here.
My name is Lana Jack. I'm from Salilo Village, where Salilo Falls is still alive. My Indian name is Xiirpo. I am water. I am the ever-present cooling mist at the falls. There's so much I wanted to say and share here today. I wish I could have filled the absent seat on the panel. As an Indian under extermination today, I have much wisdom and knowledge on what that is. We're not a timeline. We were the first people here, and we're governed by natural law, supreme law of the land, understanding our way of life, understanding what governs us as a people is a really important place to come from. So in terms of protecting the land and forming these alliances, it will always go back, even though the state and counties have their jurisdictions, we supersede that as supreme law of the land. Federal Indian law, I'm not a Native American, I'm an American Indian protected by federal Indian law. And today, having to be a defender and having to be the last of my people, having Aboriginal title upon the land that my ancestors have occupied since the first dawn, is nothing that I would wish on anybody. But you see the symbiotic relationship, the interconnectedness that our people operated from and forming and having voice in these treaties was based on our stewardship, our coexistence with our mother. Our songs were given to us by the sacreds before us, the ancient ones before us, the rock, the water, the air, the earth, the trees, our water people. My ancestors said in the time that those treaty talks were being had, that what you do to us, you do to this land. What you do to us, you do to yourself. On a nation that says their forefathers are Christian, that doesn't sit well with some of us. I believe in Jesus and I love Jesus. But I don't believe in the Christianity that says you over there and I'm over here. We don't care about your language or your ways. We're in the time of decolonization. We have to address these issues of what is the truth, because you're not going to find it in your history books. My hand's up to our elders here for their oral testimonies. We're an oral culture people. And our stories go back to the first dawn. And between there and us becoming the two-leggeds walking this earth, everything between us and that first light was to be honored higher than us, and that's what our ceremonies are about. That's what we are about as a people. We've been protectors from the beginning because we knew that the elk, the deer, the berries, the roots gave us our songs, gave us life, and then highest was the water. And I'd like to continue to have these conversations because the American Indian Church of Truth and Reconciliation, we are in the hour of acknowledgement. The hour of acknowledgement is acknowledging our truths as a people and our relationship to the land and that long-standing relationship. Hear us from our hearts. If you look back at the treaty talks, you'll see our people, every one of them. From my heart, that means we're true. That's where we operated from. And we expected the same for the same people that came into treaty with us, that they would be honorable. And today, what you hear today, there's no honor in the treaties that were made between the first peoples of this land. Some of us are still prisoners of war without being acknowledged, without having the freedom of our Indian religion to go out and harvest, hunt, and gather in our usual custom places, condemned, eminent domain, because we were the resistance of the commercialization of our way of life, our genetic markers, moreover than just our way of life. There's a tribe in California, they found an old species of their salmon from the Shasta River in New Zealand, and they want to bring it back, put it back in their rivers. The government told them, you can't prove they were here. I said, find the oldest person in your tribe, because it's our genetic marker. It's a makeup of our DNA. It's who we are. When we say that they're our brothers, they're a part of our genetics, deep down in our souls, in our blood, in our bones. So we're preserving ourselves. When we go out to preserve the land and the living beings out there, we understood they had songs, language. We could connect, we could hear them. They shared them with us. We sing them in our longhouses to remember them, to protect them, to always be good stewards, coexisting with everything, that symbiotic relationship of interconnectedness. If anybody would like to hear from me anymore, I'll be here, and I'd be willing to spend some time talking with anybody. I went out to Standing Rock to share my story. And it's time. I'm one of those wild Indians under extermination, and I think it's time to save those wild Indians on this land that weren't recognized, but we're still prisoners of war, you see, because we're still on our lands within the territories of our ancestors for tens of thousands of years. Don't get us wrong. Tens and tens and tens. Millions, who knows? We didn't migrate here. We've been here. Thank you.
Maybe Tiokasin, would you mind just sharing some closing remarks? Thank you to everyone. Thank you for those words. Those were beautiful. Thank you.
No, just a big thank you for your attention and respect for the words we have here to Louise and Willie and Ed and Carri and Jessica, Klairice, Rosebud. Thank you all for bringing the children here, for recognizing the place that we're at. And I just want to leave one thing with you is the whole idea about water, mani, and I could describe it to you in the way that I was told how to describe it, but I'll hold that. I think is the thoughts of your words, your language, the etymology of your language that we speak here. It's a foreign language to us, right? Mm-hmm. English is a foreign language. Think about that when you start to think about Native people. So I'm going to go back to that language, even magi. If you don't know the word for magi, the etymology of magi, it's not genie or anything like that, Aladdin's lamp. Magi merely means tools of the earth. And when you understand what a magi is, I always think about the buffalo in South Dakota, how without technology, but just by their sheer attention to the earth, one reason 80 million of them were wiped out and why the Dust Bowl happened in that area of this Turtle Island is that when the buffalo ran, they called the water to the surface. When that keystone species was removed, the water receded. And now we're having to deal with the loss of probably the largest aquifer in the United States. It's contaminated, and Rosebud's parents work on this. A lot of people work on this, and we drink contaminated water, just like Louise said. And I want to think about what is a magi. It's that buffalo. It's that salmon. It's that bird. It's that tree. All these are magi without conscience. They're not thinking about if we're doing the right thing or wrong thing. They're just doing it. They're practicing their original instructions by being tools of the earth. And so when a seagull flies, it's a magi using the wind. And the wind is the activist. And the water is the activist. And the rock is the activist. And the storm, those are the activists. And we speak this foreign language of neglect for Mother Earth. So again, rethink, respect. Respect really means to look again. That's all it means. It's simple. You may outthink yourself with this language in your education. It's time to get simple again, because that's Mother Earth of all the beings is trying hard right now to get your attention. And so the magic is what they create. But we, in the modern world, have become magicians. We have given the illusion that our ways, the Western world in this way, the technical ability of Facebook and all these things are disconnecting us even further away from the magi, separating us. Magician merely means the illusion to trick others. So, are you a magician? Are you a magi, paying attention to the tools of the earth? So magic merely means to use the tools of the earth properly. And in the light of words of an uncle and a relative, he basically said, to know the earth and how do you protect your spirit is by understanding the magi, those who are the magic that we forget with this language. And so please ask us, because as our young sister said here, that we still retain that, but we're not willing to give you the answer because it's already there within you. So I'd like to close with that, and thank you very much for being here. And don't educate the wisdom out of yourself.